spiritual practice, what you're doing is following a set of rules, aligning yourself with the universe, if you will.
Keep watching to learn more.
Book 3 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we'll be exploring spiritual practice and scientific inquiry. With me is Dr. Edward Close, who is the author of Transcendental Physics. He is the co-author with Vernon Neppe of Reality Begins with Consciousness. He has also authored a chapter in a brand new anthology called Is Consciousness Primary?, edited by Gary Schwartz and Marjorie Woollacott, and the title of that chapter is The Mathematical Unification of Space, Time, Matter, Energy, and Consciousness. He also has a forthcoming book coming out called Secrets of the Sacred Cube, a cosmic love story. Welcome, Ed.
Oh, thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm delighted to be with you. I'm really thrilled that you've come here to Albuquerque. And you are an individual who has maintained a consistent yoga practice for nearly 6 decades.
Yeah, that's true. About the same time that I got interested in theoretical physics through the work of Albert Einstein, I also got interested in consciousness expansion and the various methods and the perennial philosophy. I was reading things like Aldous Huxley, and I got interested in the Rosicrucian order at one time. But eventually what caught my attention was a self-realization organization, Self-Realization Fellowship, founded by Paramahansa Yogananda.
The author of the famous book Autobiography of a Yogi.
Yes, and most people who get interested in and become members of SRF, Self-Realization Fellowship, will say that that's the book that brought them in, reading his life story and experiences.
It's a very compelling book, but now in your case, as I recall, you had some very profound experiences even as a child.
Yes, I did, and that's why, even though I love mathematics and physics, I knew there was something more than the basis of the normal materialistic paradigm from these experiences. And so the two things to me always work together, because I felt that what we experience in life, and like as Niels Bohr has said, what we really are doing in science is describing what we experience, what things are real to us. And then you get into the definition of reality. And if you take one metaphysical point of view, it's only real if it's physical in the sense of matter, energy, time, and space. Everything else is secondary. But as you know, in our work, meaning mine and Dr. Neppi's, and also in an increasing number of legitimate scientists, that worldview is reversed, where we feel like one way to look at it is, what do we experience directly? Because if you look at the physics of perception, you find that it's very indirect. When we look at something, for example, we only see a very narrow bit of the energy that's there, a little slice of the electromagnetic spectrum, so forth. So we only see a little bit of the reality that's there through our senses. But what do we experience? The only thing, and it's indirectly, because if you look at the physics of it, you've got a photon that's bouncing off of an object and going into your eye and hitting the retina and triggering a flow of electrical charge in the optic nerve, and eventually getting to the brain and being compared with everything you've got stored in there. There are far more tracks in the brain that are comparison than there are incoming. If you look at it as a machine, it's an amazing machine. Comes to saying, oh, that's a house, or that's a chair, or that's a Rubik's Cube, whatever. And it's amazing how that works. But that means that we don't experience that object directly.
Yeah.
We experience through this chain.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we experience directly? Well, that would be consciousness.
Consciousness itself.
Thinking that way and realizing that reality is holistic. It's not something that has bits and parts that don't fit together. Somehow it fits together. Otherwise, we would not have a stable universe. Mm-hmm. So it must all work together some way. And then when you get to phenomena, things like I did experience as a child.
Let's talk about that particular experience.
Okay. The first things that I experienced were sometimes what I call heightened senses that were, I thought nothing of it because, I'm a kid and it happens to me. It probably happens to everybody else. But I found out it was unusual if I talked to somebody about it. My father said, well, you're a growing boy, you'll outgrow it. But I never did. The experience has changed somewhat over the years, but I've still had and have those kinds of experiences. And one that I think you may be referring to that I mentioned was in my grandparents' house, where I saw something in a dream, what to me was a dream, except it's one of these dreams, and I find a lot of people have this dream of flying or floating, or kind of somehow you suddenly discover a certain movement you can make, or a certain thing you can do, that all of a sudden you're airborne. And a lot of people have this dream. And so, of course, again, I was like 10 years old, so to me it was just a dream. And I was staying overnight at my grandparents' house to go fishing the next morning with my Uncle George. And all of a sudden, in my dream, I was in the main living room of the house downstairs, when actually, physically, my body was asleep upstairs in bed. But in my dream, I thought I was in the living room. But the unusual thing, that it was a dream, in my thinking then, I began to float up. And as I floated up, I saw something on top of a large china cabinet that my grandmother had, an object there. But strange thing in the dream was when I floated up to the ceiling, I didn't stop. It's like my head didn't bump against the ceiling. I seemed to just go right on through and into the upstairs in the room next to the room where my uncle and I slept. And then on through the roof and out into the night sky. And the last thing I remembered was seeing, like I'm looking down on the valley. This is Arcadia Valley in the San Francisco Mountains in Missouri. Anyway, the next morning, when we came down to go fishing, I looked at the china cabinet and I said, I wonder if there's really something up there. What I'd seen the night before was a toy airplane about so big with, was basically yellow with blue designs on it. And it looked like a new toy, bright colors and everything. I thought, I wonder if there's really something up there. So I pulling a chair over to climb up and look. And my uncle came down and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I think there's something up on the china cabinet. And he said, get down from there before you fall and hurt yourself. And he got up on the chair. And he's older and taller than me. And he reaches up and he pulls out a toy airplane. It's yellow, and it's the airplane I saw. He said, don't throw it up there again. And I didn't say it to him, but I know I didn't throw it up there. I thought to myself, maybe one of my cousins did, but I had never seen it before, except in the dream.
So that would be a classic out-of-body experience.
Yeah. Of course, at that time, at that age, I didn't think of it that way at all. I thought, well, wow, my dream was real. That was my thought.
Now, on another occasion, as I recall, you spoke to the universe and asked for knowledge.
Yeah, that was a bit later. My parents moved, and I moved to Arizona in 1949 because we nearly got wiped out by a tornado in the wintertime of 1949, an unheard of thing. January the 29th, 1949. And my dad said, that's it, we're moving, and we moved to Arizona. But we didn't stay there long. When we came back, I was enamored of farm life because of visiting my grandparents' farm. We actually lived in town. But I thought, I'd want to live on a farm. I didn't realize how much work's involved on a farm, but my dad bought a farm, not just because I wanted to do that. He did too, and my mother. So they bought a farm in Texas County, Missouri, and sort of the south central part of the state of Missouri, which is the largest part of what's called Missouri Ozarks. And I had gotten interested in. I was 14 by this time, and during a summer, I got a hold of some old books at an auction or something. And one of them was a book on analytic geometry, but it's actually in German. But I'd already learned some German as a child because a couple of my grandparents spoke German. And so it was of interest to me. But the math of it and the diagrams and everything seemed like very real and something that I already knew. I didn't have to learn this. And algebra was like that for me. It's like, well, of course, you do that with the exponent or you do that with the equation. It's obvious. It's like I already knew it. And so I got interested in that kind of thing. And I came across a little book by Albert Einstein, An Introduction to the Special and General Theory of Relativity. So
at the age of 14.
At 14, yeah. I didn't think it was unusual. Some of my friends did because their interests were right at that time were Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe and that sort of thing. And but my idol was Albert Einstein. And I cried when he died because I knew I'd never get to meet him. He died while I was in high school. But at any rate, at one point in reading the electrodynamics of moving objects, which is actually the name of Einstein's paper about relativity, or special relativity, I got to a point that was beyond my understanding. And it was frustrating, and I walked outside of the farmhouse and went up to the banks of a pond, and walking by a row of trees, and I just, out of frustration, said, God, I want to know everything. And I had a sudden response. It's like somebody turned a switch and sound went away. There was no sound. And everything around me seemed to be alive. And it's like, the only way I can describe it is like I sort of melted into my surroundings, it's just like everything was alive, like in the pond and in the trees. And then I could hear, and I had no idea what it was. Later, I found out it was something called the Om sound. I could hear this sound that was like at the heart of everything, and more like the sound of a river flowing or something. And I thought, that's my answer, so I'm going to be a theoretical physicist. I've gotten the answer that the way to know everything is to become a theoretical physicist. So that was maybe a little bit unusual. And most of the people in science who go to consciousness studies and things like that, most people who are in the hard sciences in particular, have some kind of an epiphany that happens after they've had the scientific training. In my case, and I've met one or two other people, that wasn't the case. It's like I knew from early on that reality is a lot more than mass and energy and time and space, even though what I wanted to study, and I've come to the understanding that the study of any subject really can lead you to an expanded awareness, to really understand a musical instrument, to really understand any subject in great detail. You almost become one with the subject, and then you realize that everything's related, and that leads to other things that you learn and experience. So this is why I think meditation is an important thing for me. It certainly is, and I think should be for. I really believe that the scientists of the future will go beyond just training their intellect to use intellectual tools, but train their entire being, their consciousness, in learning to understand. And I think that's where we're going, but it may take a while.
Well, in 1960, I gather you were about 24 years old at the time, you encountered the Self-Realization Fellowship, this organization founded by Yogananda, and you received an initiation then, which was very serious. You took on that initiation and remained with that practice the rest of your life.
The rest of my life, yes. They have an advanced technique, and you take courses, and of course, all of this as someone with a basically analytical mind, this made perfect sense to me. You study a subject, you learn about it, and then you apply it. And that's what appealed to me. Other sort of metaphysical groups that had rituals and things that they performed, if nobody could explain to me why a certain thing was done, then why do it? Unless. So I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand if I got into a way of interacting with the universe that involved some sort of concentration and some process. I wanted to understand the process as well. Had to be something that made sense to me. And this was the first thing I encountered that really made sense and fit with the experience that I had had as a child and preteen and into the teens, that told me that there is something more to reality than matter and energy.
And I gather from our conversations that the type of yoga and meditation that you were taught is known as Kriya Yoga.
Yes, that's the name for it. And it is, for reasons, the organization, like any organization, has its purposes and goals. And the organization, the Self-Realization Fellowship Organization's purpose is to maintain the purity of the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda.
A particular lineage.
Yes. And so for that reason, they don't want somebody like me explaining in detail what the method is. You have to go through the channels and take the course and do the practices and answer the questions. You actually are tested.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like going to classes and to the university, and then you have an exam. Do you understand this, or how do you understand it? Write a little essay about it.
In other words, you're not authorized, and we're not going to teach anybody in the course of this interview how to practice Kriya Yoga, but we can talk about it.
Yes. You can talk about it in what I would call general or theoretical terms, and I can talk about how it has enhanced my life and helped me to understand and expand my consciousness and understand more.
I have to assume, since you've been practicing it for almost 6 decades, that you've gotten a lot of value from it.
Yes. It's something that I'm not fanatic about it to the point where I've got to do it, even though I do practice it every day. If something happens in my life that prevents that, that's okay. I don't get upset about it. Over the years, it has fit in with the experiences. The experiences that it brought were an extension or a continuation of the experiences that I'd had earlier, and helped me to understand them, and helped me to understand life in general in a way that I didn't become like a few people that I know become disenchanted with life and sort of misfits, and nobody really understands their world. If you're doing things that are outside the box of so-called normality, which is, an artificial thing to begin with because we're all individuals and all different, then sometimes you find yourself isolated and feel like you have no friends because there's nobody you can talk to. Well, within Self-Realization Fellowship, they have what's called satsang, which is a Sanskrit term that means fellowship, basically. And that means you go and you are with people and you meditate with people and you talk with people who are like-minded.
So you have a community of support.
You do. You have a temple. There are several temples all over the world now for self-realization. And
what is the word Kriya? What does that mean?
The root meaning of it, as I understand it in Sanskrit, is kind of like to do or to make or to grow or to enhance. But to do is probably the best. So it's a way of doing with energy. It's a way of, one description is in a little book, and this is where I differ a little bit from the typical SRF person in that it wasn't the autobiography. Now, I loved the autobiography, and that sort of cemented the whole thing. But the first book I read was called The Holy Science by Swami Sri Yukteswar, who was the guru or teacher of Yogananda. And that book totally captivated me because it said things that I had already felt were true. So you always like to have confirmation of something you believe or understand. And it also explained that how you develop an inner objectivity. Now, science is generally up to that point. Science usually focuses on outer objectivity, as objectivity being actually divorcing yourself and your consciousness from an object and studying it as an object. Through looking at it in the opposite sense, is so much a part of TDVP, the model that Dr. Vernon Neppy and I have worked on, that it all fits together. Now, for any other individual, it might be a different form of what's been called mysticism. In my opinion, mysticism is a word that's misunderstood because it means anything that science doesn't understand. It's not necessarily something that's not true or not valid. It's just not understood. So it's mystical.
I'm reminded of Bertrand Russell's book, Mysticism and Logic, in which he said, well, mystics claim to have an experience of one with everything. And then he examined that from a logical point of view, and he said, there's nothing illogical about it.
Yeah. And that's true. And there are two aspects of science, in my opinion, and they're both very important. And the first one is reductionism. You look at something and you analyze it. You analyze the parts of it, and you try to understand how they work together, and that's good. But then the other side of it is, at some point, you realize that the whole is almost always more than the sum of the parts. And so by doing reduction, you're not understanding the holistic nature of reality. So at some point, no matter how deep you go into the detail, as we have into quarks and protons and everything, how these combinations occur, no matter how deep you go, at some point, you've got to back up and put it all together, integrate it. And that's what TDVP does. It's an integrating model of reality.
So would you say that your theoretical work with Dr. Neppy was enhanced because of your Kriya Yoga practice?
Yes, I absolutely believe that, experience that. This is why I said to a well-known physicist one time at a meeting, we were just passing, really. We were all coming out of the lecture hall, and I just turned to him and said, "Have you started meditating yet?" And he looked at me like I was from Mars and said, "No, why should I?" And my answer is, I think every scientist should be meditating. Because by doing that, you can do the integrating part. You can take the pieces and put them back together and understand the workings of the whole.
You have an interesting process. We have some Rubik cubes here, and maybe we could talk about that for a moment, the idea of integrating, because it seems that one of the goals of spiritual practice of any kind, if it's an authentic spiritual practice, is the alignment of body, mind, and spirit.
Yes. That's a really good introduction to this, because and let me mention modeling in a general sense.
Yeah.
Because what modeling is the representation of something else.
Mm-hmm.
If you model something, like somebody said, well, a model is a small imitation of the real thing. And that's true. So there's mathematical modeling, which I've been involved in all my life. That's what I did in the systems analysis group for the Department of Interior for about 12 years, was construct mathematical models. But we also did some analog models. Well, the Rubik's Cube is an analog model. And it can be used to model. The first thing I realized it could model the fermion, which is the particles that combine together become the proton and the neutron, along with the electron, to become the atoms, that become the molecules, that become the cells, that become the reality that we experience. So that was amazing when I thought I actually could learn some things from doing that model that corresponded with experimental evidence. So this was an epiphany for me. But then I had since we're talking about meditation, I had the thought that, I can use the different tiers and the different subcubes in a Rubik's Cube to model various things too. And, for instance, the TDVP has, we've found that mathematically there have to be 9 dimensions. Well, a cube has 9 tiers, 3 in each dimension. And so this can be used to actually model what happens when you have rotation in 9 dimensions. So that was...
Which is exactly what your theory postulates.
Yes. So then I thought, well, let's go a little further. Let's just suppose that we're going to say that the bottom cube or the bottom tier, let's say it's analogous to your physical being, and the middle tier is analogous to your mental being, your mental well-being, and the third one is your spirit. So you got body, mind, and spirit. And if they're aligned, and as you mentioned, alignment's a big, important thing. Our Native American shaman, I have a very good friend who is one. They align, their sacred places are all aligned. They stake out north, south, east, and west, and up and down, and you've got it right here in the cube. Each face of the cube is a direction. And if you think of the universe as being an ordered place, which if it weren't, science wouldn't work. Science is discovering patterns and organization in reality that give us the ability to predict what's going to happen next in our lives. So if you think of this then as that model, and you think of this as the aligned person, then most of us are like this, scrambled. And it gives a good avocation for people like psychologists and psychiatrists to help people to unscramble their lives. But it has to be unscrambled, and this is why we need psychologists and psychiatrists. It has to be unscrambled in accordance with certain rules, because the universe is an ordered place with rules. In physics, it's the rules of gravitation and electromagnetic and electricity and magnetism, all these forces that you might be aligning yourself with. So to get from this to this may be very difficult, and if you don't make the right moves, then you won't get from here to there. You'll spend a lot of time just spinning your wheels, so to speak, by doing one thing and another.
Because if you're in a confused state, it's hard to pull out of it. I think it was Einstein who said, we can't solve a problem from the mindset that created that problem.
He did. That's one of his marvelous quotes. So being a modeler, being a mathematician, I do have degrees in math and physics and engineering. But being a modeler and a mathematician and interested in the theoretical side of things, I thought, there are algorithms that can be developed, and not just to solve a mathematical problem, to determine what you have to do to make a rocket to outer space work or anything else work, but how to make your life work. So there are rules and regulations, and we'll call them algorithms, which means there's a protocol or a series of steps that you can take that will improve your chances of going from this to this. And so you learn those algorithms first. And it's really kind of like learning to play a musical instrument. Unless you're a child prodigy that somehow knows how to play the instrument at 2 years old, you have to go through the steps of learning the algorithms, of learning the rules of what the scale is and what things harmonize and what don't, and so forth. So with the cube, you have to learn algorithms, and then it enables you to develop your concentration. And this is why I'd say it's a tool. And in the new book that you mentioned, this is really the thrust of the book, that the Rubik's Cube, as I use it, is not just a toy for entertainment. It's actually a way to develop the skills that you need to deal with life, even. And so one of them is concentration. And if you've ever tried to solve the Rubik's Cube, you know it takes a lot of focus and concentration. I took a cube with me to the Middle East in 1981, and the cube just became available in the U.S. in like 79 or 80. And I bought one and took it with me. And during the month of Ramadan, when we're not used to in this country, but during the month of Ramadan, the Muslims don't eat or drink or do anything, basically, during daylight hours. So that means if you're working with local people, which I was.
You were in Saudi Arabia.
I was in Saudi Arabia, and I was the engineer, well, first the planner and then the engineer for an industrial city. And in the process, I was training my Saudi counterpart to do what I do. And so I worked with him. And the person above me, who was a counterpart of my American boss, also was a Saudi that was being trained. And so I was going between these two and learning Arabic and so forth. And but when Ramadan came, I had my cube, and nobody had told me that you can't solve it without somebody explaining to you how to do it. So it only took me a couple of weeks. I found out later that Rubik himself took a month to solve the first one after he had built it and scrambled it. But I didn't have that information, so I was like the bumblebee. I didn't know I couldn't fly. And so I solved it, but then it wasn't a big part of my life. I was working on a lot of other things, and so I put it aside and for years didn't think about it. And I picked it up later and realized that I couldn't remember all of the moves that I had made to solve it, and the notes had gotten lost in moving. So I had discovered a different kind of memory. And I call it somatic memory. To me, another word for it is muscle memory. And you have that. Everybody has it. You use it when you ride a bicycle, for example. At first, you have to learn the algorithm. You have to learn that if I'm falling this way, I turn this way, not that way. That sort of thing. But after you learn that, and it becomes a muscle memory, you do it automatically. And it's just part of the process. Music, the same way. A musician knows when he starts a bridge or something, he knows where he's going. He's already got in his mind what melody he's tying into. He doesn't even have to read the music necessarily if he knows the piece. That's why an accomplished musician may have the music there, but he may never even look at it while he's playing this particular piece, however complex it might be. So the mind's a wonderful thing. And then after Vernon and I got together and were developing our model, I thought, and I found that this would model a fermion with a intrinsic spin of 1/2. I won't go into details of that, but I thought, well, that's really fascinating. Let's look at this, and that by showing people that you can learn to unscramble one of these in less than a minute.
Mm.
Not necessarily every time. I'd have to say, in my case, if I'd pick up a scrambled cube, it could take me anywhere from a little under a minute to a little over 2 minutes, maybe, to do it. Now, there are all kinds of lessons to be had here, because if you're trying to solve a cube and you make a wrong turn, you use the algorithm you've learned, but you use it backwards or something, because there's a left-hand version and a right-hand version, it turns out, of each algorithm. And you have to use one or the other depending upon the pattern you're seeing in the cube. If you use the wrong one, you've just re-scrambled the cube and you almost have to start over. So life's kind of like that. If you make a wrong decision, it takes you down the wrong path. It may take you years to get back to where you were in terms of mental, physical, or spiritual health.
And perhaps even lifetimes.
Perhaps even lifetimes. So, if you want me to do it, I'll do one.
Okay, now, and I realize you don't want to talk while you're doing it because you need to concentrate.
Yes. That's a part of it. Concentration, logic, and intuition. And we can talk about the intuition part some, I think, would be appropriate. So you take a scrambled cube, a given scrambled cube, and you kind of size it up and see where certain things are. And I'll go ahead and do it and then maybe talk about it.
Okay.
So and there we have a solved cube, or an aligned person, so to speak, and symbolically. I only used about 7 different algorithms in doing that, and their counterparts. So you could say 14, but it's kind of like learning to ride a bicycle. Once you learn to do one of them, and you practice a little bit, you can do the left-hand version as well.
So it sounds as if what you're saying is that this work with the Rubik's Cube is in its own way analogous to the Kriya Yoga that you've been doing.
Yes, I would say that in any sort of spiritual practice, what you're doing is following a set of rules, aligning yourself with the universe, if you will, or depending upon your philosophical and theological bent, aligning yourself with God's will, or aligning yourself with however you want to think of it. And you have a protocol that you follow. Now, at some point, you can improve on that, and that brings up the idea of intuition. As you develop the solving of the cube and learn the algorithms, at some point, you learn that the algorithms do certain things. They move certain of the cubes, of the subparts of the cube, in certain ways. And you know that well enough that if you see certain patterns, you know which algorithm to use. And then there's another further thing that's a little bit strange to some people. At some point, the cube seems to come alive. And people say, well, now you're really getting weird. But in a way, this works with the Nepi-Close model, in that what we found is that there is some aspect of consciousness in every bit of matter in the universe, down to the quarks and protons and neutrons and hydrogen atoms. There's a bit of consciousness, if you will, in everything. So there's consciousness in the molecules and atoms that make the Rubik's Cube. So what happens is kind of like the musician, the accomplished musician. When you get to the point where you really understand the cube, it will start giving you cues as to what algorithm to use next, or what one you can skip by doing a certain movement. And so it's just fascinating to me how much it models and is analogous to real life.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've accomplished a great deal. Your TDVP theory is not yet widely accepted at all. It's brand new, and it's so comprehensive and so multidisciplinary that very few people are able to grasp every aspect of it. It could be completely wrong for all I know, but I have to say that to even develop a model like that, right or wrong, requires a kind of focus and alignment that you couldn't have done that if you were a scrambled up, confused person.
Yeah. So in a sense, and this is sort of counter to the feeling a lot of times, and I experienced this when I was a physics major, that intelligent people and most people who get into theoretical physics are, maybe a little above the average in intelligence. And most of them think they are and think they're way above average. But they almost take delight in the fact that they can not have to do much study because they are so smart, and they can go to the local bar and drink every night and destroy brain cells and still do physics. But the problem with that is, back to the cube, it means that while they're developing the mental aspect, they're messing up the physical aspect. Now, in the cube, you do that too. Whenever you solve a cube, scramble it up a little bit again, and it can be scrambled anyway. Whenever you're solving the cube, you do have to disturb once you get one part of it done. So I'll do the what needs to be done to get the one layer. Let me just do one layer because I can do that rather quickly. And it'll demonstrate what I'm talking about, or illustrate what I'm talking about. Sometimes when I've done this at a couple of conventions or seminars, and the nice thing about it is if I mess up, I can say, well, it's just like life. I did a wrong turn, and so I have to redo it. So that's just another example of how the cube is analogous to real life.
Well, it's interesting to me that you had this experience initially in Saudi Arabia where the cube truly is sacred.
Yeah, in the Kaaba.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Okay, there's the bottom one is all completed now, but you've got to do the second layer without messing up the first.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it can be counterproductive. Because you can get the next one done, and if the first one's messed up, well, then you're still not alive.
Let's just hold up the bottom layer so our viewers can see. Yeah, there it is.
And so the whole trick is to develop an algorithm that will allow you, because obviously you can't move this one, which is very obviously in the wrong place. You can't move this one without moving one of these tiers.
Right.
And if you move one of the tiers, you're also disturbing the layer that you've already.
It's very elegant metaphor.
Yeah. Yes, and it goes on and on. I mean, they're just it's just amazing to me how many analogies you can come up with that are analogous to real life.
So what you're essentially saying is that the goal of spiritual practice is an alignment of body, mind, spirit, emotions you might add in. And you can do that through engaging in a disciplined practice and maintaining that practice. And when you have that inner alignment, your whole being is working in a focused, purposeful manner to accomplish whatever goals you may choose for yourself.
Yes. Yeah, and I would go further to say that the whole reason of the existence is for us to learn and grow, and ultimately it's to learn and grow spiritually. And so, I would say that the ultimate goal is to find a way to get to the point, and I'll even go a little further and say that along the line, you get to the point where you realize that because there is, and we'll talk about the word consciousness again, which has been a taboo word especially in physics for years. The minute if you submit a paper to a journal, it can be beautiful paper, mathematics and physics, but if you relate it or bring in the concept and say the word consciousness, it's not going to get published.
Well, the irony is that even in psychology, the field that's supposed to study consciousness, that was true for roughly half a century, from about 1920 to 1970.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of the reason was if you have a science, I tell everybody that physics is the simplest science. A lot of people think, it's so complicated and so abstract and so cerebral, it has no bearing to real life. No, it's in fact the simplest science because it only deals with matter and energy, time and space, 4 variables. Easy. What's difficult is something like economics. To me, economics is like the game where you have these things that pop up and you hit them.
Whack-a-mole.
And as soon as you hit this one, another one pops up over there and you don't know where it's going to pop up. That's a difficult thing to me. Something like physics, where you're working with laws of natural laws, is a whole lot simpler than.
Well, typically because science doesn't recognize the role of the observer as much as it should. The idea that scientists themselves would do better science by engaging in inner disciplines, you can call them spiritual practices or psychological practices, they're not achieving their full potential.
I totally agree with that. Not at all. And people, even scientists, even theoretical physicists, tend to box themselves in because there's a comfort level to knowing your box that you're in. I know all there is to know about this. There isn't any more. This is what gave rise to the idea of a theory of everything. To a physicist, a theoretical physicist, in the mainstream physics of today, a theory of everything is not a theory of everything to you or me, or to anybody else really, but the theoretical physicist, because the only thing that's going to be in his model, his theory of everything, will be what the a priori assumptions he starts with recognizes as part of reality. And if that's only matter, energy, time, and consciousness...
Or space, you mean?
Matter, energy, time, and space, yes, thank you. If it's only those 4 things, then I'm sorry, but that's not a theory of everything. Because even Niels Bohr, who was a famous theoretical physicist, said the business of science is described what we experience. And if what we experience most directly is consciousness, then if you have a theory of everything that doesn't have consciousness in it, it's not a theory of everything.
Dr. Edward Close, once again, a delightful, inspiring, and stimulating conversation. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. I just really enjoy talking with you.
And thank you for being with us.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.